welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, Making Work Across the Globe, with me, Tom Sherrington, and my great colleague, Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Tom. Are you well?
Yeah, I'm really good, and I'm pleased that I actually managed to say our tagline properly, because the last episode I completely forgot what it was. So that was
Except you didn't. You just missed out a word in it, but I shan't pick you up on that.
there we go. Anyway, so we're good. So, but we're really excited today because finally, because we've been trying to track you down, Amanda. We have got Amanda Wilson with us on our show. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Emma. Nice to meet you both.
Yeah, it's really great to meet you. And we're buzzing. Like we talk about potential guests, and sometimes all of a sudden we're like, oh wow, have you read this thing? And we're both reading I think it was a Guardian article about your book, and then we're thinking, what's this book? And then we both got it. So let's do the show. Come on, Emma. 3, 2.
Yeah.
So Amanda, so you've come to our attention because you've written this book, Letters to a Young Generation, Aspiring School Leaders, and it says igniting a passion in the next generation of Black school leaders. And essentially, it's a book where lots of different Black head teachers, the school leaders, have talked about their experience of that, and it's just great. I mean, it's so powerful, and we want to just hear all about it, really. So, but also, a bit of background before we get into that, maybe if you just want to tell people a bit about yourself, where you're working and the kind of stuff you're up to at the moment, that'd be really good.
Oh, yeah. So I work at a school called St Alfred with St Peter's, which is in Greenwich. It's right in the centre of Greenwich, round the corner from the Cutty Sark, or across the road from Up the Creek Comedy Club, depending on sort of what your frame of reference is, how cultural you want to be. But yeah, we're right in the centre now. This is my 5th year in headship. I started there in September 2019. And in November 2019, I was writing my business continuity plan, which kind of covered things like pandemics and that kind of thing. And I'm writing, when's there ever going to be a pandemic? When's this going to happen? And then, 3 months later, I was in the midst of a pandemic. So I started my headship head first. But I have genuinely loved every part of the journey. And so, yeah, being a head teacher is one of the best jobs that I've ever had. So it's something I'm passionate about. And that leads me to be then passionate about encouraging others to kind of get up that leadership ladder.
So what sort of teaching were you doing before, or what was your route to becoming a head teacher of that school?
So it's quite a sort of, a roundabout route. So my first career was actually in retail. And I worked for Tesco's for a while as a training manager. And then in my late 20s, I decided it was time to sort of move on because the career progress there wasn't quite going where I wanted to. So I took a year out from work and I started working my daughter's preschool, volunteering. And I thought, I quite like this. And then I got a job as a learning support assistant. And I thought, I quite like this as well. And so then I decided, train to be a teacher. And it was, as much as, and I've said this a few times, as much as people say their teacher was their vocation, they felt led to it, and, they're in it to kind of change the world. I was genuinely in it for the holidays. Because, and there was no shame. I don't feel ashamed saying that at all. It fit in with my daughter. She was young at the time. It was great. When people say 13 weeks holiday, it's like, yes, we get 13 weeks holiday. But that was initially, obviously, I've kind of come a long way since then. So then I was teaching for about 5 years. And then the school that I was at in Newham, we were part of a PFI project, which was a different type of PFI because it was a school that had a project where 30 schools in Newham had the year 5s and 6s all had access to laptops, individual laptops. And so I managed the project for my school in school. And then so it was a company called RM Education. And so they managed the project with Newham. And then I started working for RM as the project coordinator for the 30 schools. So that was me going into schools, teaching them how to use the computers to develop teaching and learning. And then when that project ended, I then carried on working for RM, but I worked in the bid department. So at the time they were going, you know, free schools and academies were just up and coming. So I used to write the parts of the bid that were all about how technology could be used to enhance teaching and learning. So I used to have to work with all the other bid writers. They're all working all the other technology bits. And it was a really interesting job because I got to know a lot of the current free schools and what their requirements were and what their visions were for their school. So actually, it was a really interesting time for me to see how schools were developing and the ideas that schools had in terms of trying to make them innovative. And then being a private company, they went through a round of redundancies. And it just so happened that my line manager at the time was the friend of who was going to be my new boss. And she said, you know, I told her I was going to leave. She said, oh, and I know somebody's looking for a deputy head teacher. And I thought, why not? So I went for the job, got the job. And then because it was part of a federation, they were then going into an all-through school with another school that they were part of. And it's kind of just, you know, snowballed from there. So I worked at one school as a deputy, then moved on to a head of school. And I was quite happy to stay as a deputy head teacher, end my retirement there. My husband would have, you know, he had my career mapped out for me. He had me executive head of schools. And it was more fear that stopped me from progressing and from moving forward. But then I went to see a friend of mine who was a head teacher at a school, and I kind of thought, why not? The only difference is that my name would be above the door, whereas before, you know, any issues that came up, I could kind of push them up to executive head teachers. But this was my chance to say, actually, what's the worst that could happen? I've always got Tesco's to fall back on. And so, you know, here I am 5 years later, and I've done an all right job.
I love it. It's so like, it's like, that's just not the opposite of a sort of like nice, neat story of like, then, you know, sort of, and I think that's great. And that's just shows, doesn't it? We have to sort of embrace the kind of the pathways and see teaching as having multiple ways in and motivate people to keep going. So Emma, what do you think of that? I've had the stories like not typical.
It was not typical, but what a rich story. Because I was just thinking, you've come from a career change and then you viewed education from every role within an organization, from support staff role, teaching role. And I don't think people set enough store by the kinds of roles like you had with the tech company, where you see multiple schools, because that really helps to shape, this is, and you don't necessarily know you're thinking at the time, this is what I would do, and that's what I definitely wouldn't do.
Absolutely.
And that kind of richness of experience of seeing multiple routes. And I find those kind of roles and those kind of non-standard routes through into leadership absolutely fascinating, because it brings a richness of experience that you don't necessarily get if you follow that kind of traditional linear trajectory. So I was just listening to you thinking, wow, you've seen education from so many vantage points. And I was just thinking, if that helped to shape your view of when you did get that, your kind of exec role, whether that helped to shape your thinking about how you wanted to do things or how you didn't want to do things.
I'm not an exec.
Oh, sorry.
No. I appreciate you kind of speaking into my life. However, I'm a head teacher.
When you went into that senior role, to say, this has helped to shape my thinking.
Yeah, I think I'd worked. So my deputy headship was at one form-entry school. My head of school role was at a 2 form-entry school, and that helped me to decide, actually, I prefer 1 form-entry schools. And you know, Newham, when I was working in Newham, I got to go into all 30 schools in Newham. And then as part of my PF5 BSF workings and that kind of thing, working for bid writing, I got to go into secondary schools, I got to go into schools all over the country. And so me being able to see the different facets and also see different types of leadership as well, and see those people, you know, because when I was doing the bid writing stuff, we were working with schools that were from ground level up, and seeing how leaders would ignite their teams and do their training and give their support and all that kind of thing. So that's all shaped my, okay, so if I'm going to initiate this type of thing, this is what I need to be thinking about. This is how I need to make sure that my staff are coming along on the journey. And so it really has been a benefit to shape who I am as a leader, but also, you know, my career in retail as well, and the leadership skills that I've picked up there. And, you know, it's all, you know, I worked, one of the things I did when I was working at Tesco's was I helped to set up the Tesco Kensington store, which was their flagship store at the time. And I worked on all the training and development and setting that up. And that was kind of a multi-million-pound project. And so that's kind of helped me to see, okay, when it comes to training and development, this is what I need to take into consideration for my staff. So the different facets that I've had over the years, and you know, until you talk about it, you don't realise, oh yeah, I've done quite a lot, and it's all fed into in some way. Like you said, you don't realise it at the time, but now when I get to this point in my life, it's like, yeah, wow, okay, that's a lot.
Oh my God, what an asset! Because I mean, the number of things you have to do as a head. I remember being as a head thinking, pretty ridiculous sitting down here sort of with architects and, you know, multi-million-pound building projects that I haven't got a clue, and they're asking me, you know, where to put stuff. Yeah. I thought you were going to tell me, and you're asking me. It's sort of like, it blows your mind how many responsibilities you have.
Yeah.
Let's get into this, the thing about your letters book there, because it's such a powerful concept. And, you know, we've interviewed a couple of other head teachers, black head teachers, Frankie, well, I should call her properly, Frances Akinde, Dinah Sagi, and it's not like a side issue for them, you know. They very, you know, they're both, it's an important factor of their whole experience of headship, that they're like a rare head as being a black and the other heads and so on, and then having to sort of face that kind of a number of different aspects of that. But then let just tell people, but let's go back a bit and say, so you've obviously come to this idea of the book, and tell how it came about, and then we'll get started into some of the stories in it. It's excellent. I really obviously want as many people to read it as possible, but where did it come from?
So this is the third book in the series. So when I went back into school as a deputy in 2014, I worked in a school where we had a few challenging children, black boys at the time, and I was looking sort of for texts for them to encourage them and to support them. And I was very aware that there didn't seem to be many books that were written from a Black British perspective, generally. Most of the sort of encouraging books are written by American authors. So at the time I did a very similar thing. I just decided, okay, went out and contacted as many black males who grew up in the UK as possible. So that ended up in a book with people like David Lammy, love or hate him, Hugh Kwashi, Julian Golding is an athlete, good friend of mine, Sheldon Thomas, who's on Gangs Line. So they kind of pulled together all these letters, and that went really well. And then a couple of years after that, I did one for girls. And it had, I think, individuals like Sunita, Miss Dynamite, you know, lots of sort of well-known celebrities at the time. And then when I think it was probably around the time that they released the census, the teacher workforce census, and everyone, you know, was talking about the fact that it was very stark that only 1% of head teachers in England were black, and that equated to 200 teachers. And then there were conversations that were being had about why that was, and why would, you know, if you're a black teacher at a different level, why would you want to go into leadership? And all I could think about is how my journey, the people that had encouraged me, so you know, I mentioned Violet and Chinye in the book, and how important it was to have those individuals in those positions, because there are some great teachers out there who, for one reason or another, just aren't being seen. And so I think it was about me being able to shine a light on those who have done the job, being able to say to the next generation, look, it's possible. You know, you may not see us because we are so disparate and so, you know, all over the place, and there's only a few of us, but we are here. And our journeys, as you've seen from mine, are all very different, but it's possible to get here. And it was then that kind of made me think, oh, actually, right, this is another book that I could do. And so once again, I just sent out a ton of emails, asked people to, you know, if they knew anyone that would identify as black, who was a head teacher, past or present, who wanted to contribute. And I think I ended up sort of getting the details of about 90 head teachers, but for varying reasons, you know, not everyone can contribute for whatever reasons, time and availability, but we got 18, and there were 18 great letters. And it's been so encouraging to see the responses, and the impact that it's had for those that have read it from both sides. So not just the black teachers, but from the white educators as well, who are learning what it's like from the other side. And I think that's the most powerful thing about the book, is that the learning it's given for all sides and all educators.
Do you want to give us a feel of one of them then? Like, because we could explore them. I mean, I could almost like want to read some out, some of them out, but just to sort of give people just of a flavour. I mean, I one of my favourite ones, partly because he's the head of the local school to me, and I met him years ago. I was the deputy head, and he came to visit me when I was the head very briefly, a few years ago. Patrick Cozier.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the head at Highgate Wood School, Crouch End, and he's been the head there for a long time. So I got, apart from anything else, he's a bit of a legend for being a long-serving head.
Yes.
In a very mixed comprehensive school, doing brilliantly, and all my friends, a lot of my friends' kids went to that school. He was their head teacher, so he's like a figure in our world, you know. So it's just. And it was just interesting, like when you know a bit about someone and you read their story. And he was someone who was really young. He became a deputy head and then head like when he was really young. So he had this thing of like sort of having to learn on the job and feeling like insecure about it for quite a long time, because he was sort of like suddenly ahead and perhaps he caught himself not being quite ready for it. And he describes that really brilliantly, how suddenly he says, I spent the first 3 years in the job scared of my own shadow. But then I grew in stature, in confidence, in experience, in emotional security, in strength of purpose and will. I am still growing now, learning all the time. And hopefully that will never stop. I think, wow, it's so honest. It's so sort of brilliantly honest. And that was going back a few years. And then he's got these sort of 7 suggestions. We can talk about some of those later. But there's that type of honesty, which I think is so refreshing to hear. So he's just one example. But what do you think it was that sort of wanted someone like Patrick to want to share that with people?
I mean, Patrick is amazing. I mean, everything that I do, whether it's related to the book or the first 100 days head teachers, he's just there. Patrick is just, I mean, he's everywhere, but he gives so much. And I think it's for a lot of them, in fact, most of them, it's just wanting to give back. And it's just that, you know, I love the phrase, sending the elevator back down. And that's what it's about. It's about not thinking, right, I've reached here, this is me, I'm done, I'm going to sit in my ivory tower and just, you know, survey my kingdom. It's about, right, what can I do to pull up the next generation? What can I do to support? What can I do to help? And for some of them, it was a case of, if all I can do is just write a letter. And I think what was quite poignant for a lot of people who wrote it, because when I sent the brief out, it was similar brief to the other 2 books. So there was no, you have to write about this, it has to come from this angle. It was, you write whatever you feel will encourage another teacher. You feel whatever you write. And for some, they were writing to themselves. For some, it's like, well, this is what I wish somebody had told me. This is what I wish somebody had shared with me when I was a new teacher, when I was coming up through the ranks. So it was, and a lot of people say that, you know, writing these letters is quite cathartic, because you kind of, it gives you an opportunity to really reflect on your journey and on what you've experienced as well, because very often we don't take time to just sit down and think about our experiences, good or bad, and think about how they've contributed to the people and the leaders that we've become. And so for a lot of the contributors, it was a case of, I am the leader that I am today because of what I had to experience. You know, when you think about someone like Dean Gordon, who came over from Jamaica, the same with my head doesn't always keep names, Floyd Steadman, you know, came over and became a teacher from, you know, from a different country, and then they had to experience racism and not kind of understand that, why is it so straightforward in Jamaica, you know, but that there's so many obstacles in the UK, when all I want to do is teach. That's all I want to be able to do, is to teach. And so I think it's knowing now that they've got this opportunity to kind of pour into that next generation and say, look, you're not alone on this journey. You know, we're with you every step of the way. And I like to kind of turn these books, they're like mentors in a book. And when you can't access somebody physically, you can access them through the book, and that's what's most important. And that's one of the reasons I made sure for all the books, including this one, I asked contributors to put, they would be happy to put some kind of contact details down, so that it wasn't just a name. It was somebody they could reach out to. That's one of the reasons why I really wanted the photos in there, because like you can connect on a personal level when you see the person who's written the letter, rather than a faceless head teacher, because there's more of a personal element to it when you can see who's written the letter.
And they are incredibly personal, these letters, aren't they? They are real stories of people's journeys, good, bad, challenging, inspiring. And I think one of the things that that came over was that kind of that bravery to be that vulnerable in telling what were some really quite challenging stories, but also reading it, I genuinely felt so inspired in leadership as well, to say these are wonderful leaders making genuine brilliant change, and I wanted to read their stories to be inspired as a leader, because they were so fantastic. But I loved Spia's entry when she was talking about the feeling of the crown. I absolutely, what it actually feels like to be in that leadership position. And I that was my personal favorite letter, because I thought it was, she's talking about, well, once you're in this position, what does it feel like, and what can you do? So were you kind of not surprised is the wrong word, with the kind of vulnerability and honesty that people were willing to share? I was so taken aback by that element of people's work and of their story.
Yeah, I wasn't, and that's only because of the previous two books. And because in the previous two books, even someone like Hugh Kwashi, who's well-known actor, had never met him, still have never met him. I've never met him. And if I ever meet him one day, I said, remember you wrote a letter for the book. But even his openness and honesty was really poignant. And so because I'd seen it from them, I knew that it was going to come again. I knew that, these letters were going to be quite honest and heartfelt. And also because I think there was an understanding that it's a letter about you. And I did one of the things I said, try not to be too autobiographical. And obviously some people couldn't help that, because it helped to kind of bring their stories together. But I think in that people wanted those who read it to see the real them and to see the reality of the situation. There's no point trying to pretty it up. There's no point trying to kind of put a bow on it and say, oh yeah, it's all lovely, it'll all be fine, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, because that's not the reality of the situation. And so in writing the letters, I think it was felt that they had to be honest, and that's what's come out when we've done the panel discussions as well, and when we had the launch. There was an honesty in the room and a vulnerability that made you think, actually, these people are really there for these individuals that read the book. And that's I really appreciate that from the writers.
I felt like I knew them after I'd read it. I felt like they'd been so honest that I would recognize them a bit and chat with them just from their So they're stunning pieces of writing in themselves as well. They're absolutely beautiful to read as well.
And there are some themes, and for me, there's a common thing that comes through is, I guess, a sense of an issue around confidence. And some people sort of, I mean, if you ever met someone like, Viv Grant, you wouldn't imagine that she was ever not confident. But even Patrick, he's a humble kind of guy, and he's not a, he is a kind of low key kind of person in the room. He's not like big ego.
Not so.
And so you've got this whole thing of head teachers can be different, but then I felt like that issue of that some of the messages are be confident, or try to be confident. So and I think that's an interesting thing about having to stand up in front of a group of head teachers, but for a group of teachers and lead. I mean, I felt like that as a head teacher, that you've got to almost like fake it to make it, like, oh God, I've got to go in there and be the head. But do you think this is the nub of it? Do you think there's a special issue around, say, teachers or middle leaders who are black, who then feel that they need additional encouragement or confidence to go for headship? Does that come through your discussions?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is this kind of, you want to be seen in the right light. And I think as a, for many black leaders, and I can't speak for everybody, but, from experience and people I've spoken to, you've kind of got this stereotype of either the angry black woman or the aggressive black man. And so you're very, very careful at how you measure yourself and how you come across. And the confidence can become, can be seen as being cocky or being aggressive. And so whereas some people, of a different ethnicities, if you're white, for example, you may feel it's fine to say, yeah, I want to do this, I want to get involved in this, I want to lead here, I want to do this. Whereas for some, if you're black and you kind of put yourself forward like that, it's kind of, whoa, it's a bit in your face type thing. Whereas it's that same passion and that same excitement that comes across, but it's seen in a different way. And so I think some people will then hold themselves back because they're worried about how they may be perceived by others. And so in that holding back, they will then miss out on opportunities. And so it's making sure that, I'm part of a group in Greenwich called Educate Against Racism. And it's a borough-wide group led by the Director of Children's Services. Our aim is to kind of change the narrative on how we support black teachers into leadership. And talking to a lot of aspiring leaders, it is a case of, I miss opportunities because somebody, there's always somebody who they've been in a position for less time than I have, but because their face fits. And a lot of it is about whose face fits. And so therefore, again, you kind of shrink into yourself a bit more because you think, well, I'm seeing all these people overtaking me. I'm seeing this person who's been in the role for 5 minutes, but they seem to have, jumped ahead as assistant headship or head of department or what have you. And nobody seems to be seeing me. And so I think it's being able to encourage people to say, yeah, it's okay to put yourself forward. It's okay to say, I am here to ask for the opportunities. But it also takes those who are above to be able to recognize that there are talented individuals, because it has to be on merit. It's not, it's not a tick boxing exercise. Nobody wants to be chosen because we need another black face or we need another a brown face. We want to be chosen because we are really good at our job, just like anybody else. Although not necessarily just like anybody else, because some people are in their jobs and they're not very good at all. However, we want to be chosen because we are good at our jobs. But some people, because they're not going to put themselves forward, they need others to be able to recognise them. And I think that's where the kind of lack of confidence comes from. It's what's going to be seen first. So people are going to see the colour of my skin first and therefore automatically have an opinion, or are they going to recognise my skills and say, okay, let me put aside my bias, let me put aside my preconceptions about what I've heard or read about black people, and let me see who the individual is behind that skin colour.
That made me think about Andrea's, is it Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea, yeah.
Andrea chapter, when she talks about this speaking up and her feelings of that sometimes not applying for things or is a form of self-preservation. And I found that part that she wrote about absolutely fascinating. Does that link to that confidence idea that you were just talking about?
Yeah, I think it is, because it is a case of what if it all goes wrong? And anybody can have that thought. But I think, and this is something that came out of one of the panel discussions that we had, I think that what if it all goes wrong is heightened when you are a person of colour, because it's not just, and you see this in the news and in the media all the time. It's not just, a head teacher's got it wrong. It's a black head teacher's got it wrong. An Asian head teacher's got it wrong. And so then ethnicity is brought into any mistake that you may make. And so there's a then certain element of, you kind of can't make any mistakes because somebody's always watching, and you've got those people then are watching and waiting for you to fall or for you to trip. to be able to say, well, what did you expect? And so that then causes people to think, I don't want that stress. I don't want that kind of pressure on me. I can choose to just stay where I am and not have to deal with that. And that's what I think the kind of conclusion a lot of people will come to is, what do I prefer? Do I just prefer a nice quiet life, or do I want to put my head above the parapet and risk that kind of criticism and that kind of sort of being in a fishbowl and being scrutinized, and not scrutinized for the right reasons? Because there's, I haven't got a problem with being scrutinized, but not because of the color of my skin, not because I'm black, because if I'm going to be scrutinized for anything, it's because the decisions I'm making are not sound decisions, and that's got nothing to do with my ethnicity.
So do you think, I mean, this is another thing, the confidence was one of them I kind of picked out, and the other one was be yourself, about authenticity. And so you've got to kind of, and to me that's a theme that I've been talking about a lot recently in terms of teachers. So, because I'm a bit, a lot of us are nerdy about teaching techniques and evidence-informed practice and cognitive science and everything. But even when you've got a fairly clear idea in your own head about, lessons that are good look like this, and then you've got to then talk about that with a group of teachers, and they're all different. Like a group of teachers are a bunch of individuals. So each individual teacher has to then go and express that in the classroom as themselves. And sometimes you see someone doing a technique, you're thinking, I like watching you do it, but I ain't ever doing that. That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think the same. Do you think the same with leadership? So you've got this thing of like leaders who you can imagine, you can see a head teacher like flying and think, wow, and sometimes they're quite self-promotional, and they say, look what we do, and it all looks great. You think, yeah, but I can't be you. And I fell into that trap myself a couple of times, sort of wanting to emulate a couple of people and like failing miserably because it wasn't authentic to me. So do you think that authenticity issue is particularly heightened then for black middle leaders or head teachers?
Yeah, I think as a black leader, I think this whole concept of bring your whole self to the workplace is a great debate, because for some people to bring their self to the workplace is kind of like that might be kind of going on dodgy ground sometimes, in terms of how you behave. But I think also you have, as I can only speak to myself as an example, and the best example I always give is during lockdown when hairdressers were closed. And I have always had my hair in, over the last sort of 10 years or so, I had my hair in braids. And during lockdown, the hairdressers were closed. I can't braid my own hair. So suddenly I had this real dilemma about having my hair out naturally in afro. And I'd either had it relaxed before, so chemically straightened, or in braids. And suddenly I thought, well, how am I going to be perceived if I have my hair out naturally? What are people going to say? Are they going to still think I'm a good head teacher? Are they going to think, oh, okay, she's really a black head teacher? Am I trying to be something different? So I had this whole, internal dilemma going on. But what swung it for me when I eventually did, because I had no choice, I had to take my hair out and have it out, was when the children came up to me and was like, Miss, I love your hair. And that to me was like, okay, this is what it's about. And it's I think it's more, the authenticity side is more about you as an individual and your personality and how you bring that into teaching and learning and leadership, as opposed to that's the defining factor when it comes to ethnicity. I think anybody else, I think about someone like Halil Tamgunas, who is a fantastic head teacher, and I watch some of his videos sometimes of him in his school dancing around and doing that. I just, I don't have the energy to do that. That's just, it's just, and it's too noisy. And so for me to try to do that, what he does, it wouldn't work for me in my school, but it works perfectly for him. But I've got to the point now when I'm 5 years into my headship where I am comfortable with what the decisions that I make and how I make them. But it takes a long time to do that. And also I think, because I'm, I'm 51, and so therefore I'm at that age where it's like, I think I don't really care much anymore what people think. It doesn't really matter. And I think those combination of things, the experience and the age, and having people around me. So I've got a very good network of head teachers within Greenwich who are very supportive, who I see how they are as head teachers, I see how different they are in their schools. And that itself gives me the confidence to think, right, okay, I don't have to do it like everybody else. But unless you've got those networks around you, unless you've got those individuals that say, yeah, it's okay to be and to do the way you think, then you are going to feel a bit, I guess, intimidated sometimes by the more progressive and outward thinking. And if you go on Twitter, sometimes you can feel really self-conscious about the way that you lead a school, because you see all these things that people are doing and all these initiatives, and you think, oh, my school's not doing half of that, and you could become really intimidated. And so I think it's that side of things is not necessarily down to ethnicity, it's down to individuals and personality.
Mm. And I can also confirm, because I used to work with Halil, he's like that all the time. All the time. But it's so true, isn't it? Because you have to grow into yourself as an individual, as a leader as well.
Yes.
And you look back on your own leadership journey, you think, I'm not the leader I was when I started. I have grown as a leader in multiple different ways due to multiple different reasons. And also you have to be the right leader in the right place, because you can be a brilliant leader, but for every pot there's a lid, and you just might not be the right leader for that particular school. I can think of schools I've worked in which I would never have led in, and then other schools where it was the perfect fit. And you just think there's that element as well of that individual aspect of, you've got to be the right person for the right place at the right time, and recognize that you're on your own leadership journey as well as an individual, as part of your career trajectory. There's a bit at the beginning of the book, towards the beginning, where it says, why not? Why not do this? And I was just wondering if you kind of had any views on how to capture that spirit for anybody who thinks, I'm not sure that leadership is for me. How do we channel why not?
Yeah, it's to some extent it's like Dr. Pepper. What's the worst that can happen? Okay. The worst that could happen is you could get struck off and not teach anymore. However, that's kind of the extreme end of it. And I think it's knowing that you've sometimes you've just got to take risks and see what happens. My reluctance to become a head teacher wasn't even a conscious thing, really. I think it was just, I'm comfortable. And it was I think when you kind of get to the point where you become uncomfortable and think, well, what's next, that you think, okay, maybe this is what it is. And it is, if it doesn't work out, there are other things you can do. And I think you see much more now, and you hear about a lot more, especially if you're on social media, which not everybody is, but if you are, you hear a lot more stories about, teachers and leaders who have tried it and it's not been for them. Individuals who've decided, okay, I prefer a head of school role because I've got somebody who's above me, where the buck stops. Individuals who decide, actually, I like being a second, I like being a deputy head teacher, I like that role. But I think until you try, then you're never going to know. And so that why not is, what are you afraid of? What is the worst that could happen? And I think until you explore that and break that down and understand where that's coming from, you need to kind of get to know yourself. And I think for me, my role as a coach and in my role as a trainee psychotherapist, I kind of begin to understand that behind every individual, there's a story that makes them who they are. And so when you get to grips with, right, okay, it's because of this experience or because of that individual that said that one thing to you that many years ago, that's made you shut down completely. Okay, well, then we need to get past that. We need to be able to deal with that so you can move forward. So I think it is having that why not, but having somebody alongside you that can kind of talk you through that why not as well.
Well, I feel like, this is why the book's so useful. And I think when we've discussed this issue with a few previous guests about the importance of representation, and in so many different aspects. It could be with curriculum. I remember talking to Benny Cara about this whole issue of, as a child, you need to see yourself in your curriculum. You need to feel like it's yours, not someone else's. And so occasionally, like people like me are in the books and are in the history stories from history and so on. And I feel like that's definitely true when you're trying to recruit. So I mean, I won't get too personal about it, but at school I know pretty well. They have a lot of Jewish and Muslim teachers, for example, because it's a school where people know that there are other people who are also like them, and they go there because they feel secure, and they talk about that. It's an explicit thing. Like, there are schools you think, oh, I'm not sure about that, because some teachers will literally not apply to schools for jobs because they don't see there's got other people who have a similar faith background, therefore don't know how well they'd be received when it comes to holidays and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So seeing people like yourself in the profession has clearly got to be a big thing. But the question I always have with this is, like, where do you begin? Because you've got to recruit to heads, you've got to have senior leaders who are up for it, and then they have to come from the pool of teachers. So it must be at the bottom end. It must be at the beginning of recruiting teachers into teaching in the first place, so where we have to do our hardest work. I mean, do you think that's true? Or do you think there are lots of teachers who just aren't going beyond that initial wave?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a conversation we've had in our EAR group about recruiting and what can be done. And we've got somebody from the ITE from the University of Greenwich on our group now, because I think it is what you see that will draw you to a particular school. I didn't apply. There's one particular school that had a vacancy. And I didn't apply for it because it was in a predominantly white area. And when I looked on the website, the only black member of staff was the premises manager. And so for me, it's like, okay, I could go in and change that, but it's like, that's not what I want to do. I want to work somewhere where I know already there's that diversity. And so I'm really fortunate to now be in a school where I look on my staff team and it's incredibly diverse. Some have come to work with me from previous schools, and some, just recruited and I've seen them and thought they were really good and recruited them from that perspective. But also my governing body are my chair of governance is very, very, that's very high on her agenda in terms of making sure there's a diversity in the staff team, in the governing body. And so I think it's having to have that collective effort from the governors and from the senior leadership to think we want a diverse school. But it depends on the context, because I know that, for example, Dean Gordon, who's another one of the other letter writers, I went to visit his school to give him copies of the book just before Christmas, and he's got an incredible amount of black teachers working in his school. But he was saying that because that's the context of his school, the majority of the children in his school are Black African, Black Caribbean. And the context of his school also is that they need those kind of role models to be able to see themselves. So he's purposely recruited, not to kind of, have some kind of apartheid system, but because he understands his school context and understands what his community needs and what his community will respond to. And so I think, it's you as a leader knowing, right, what's needed here, what will benefit this school, and being able to be brave enough to kind of go for that. Because I know that for me, that the diversity that I have in my staff team really does match the diversity that I have in the school. So when I've got some East Asian teachers, the look on the children's faces when they, when I have my Vietnamese and Chinese children who are seeing staff that look like them is priceless, because suddenly it's like, okay, somebody who really understands when we're talking about the Chinese New Year, why am I talking about it when I've got staff and children that can fully educate us on what the situation and how the celebration is about? And so I think it's so important for everybody at all levels. And I think, when we go out to, we work at other schools and we work with other schools within the local community, because others are seeing what our school is like. If we have vacancies, they know what they're going to get when they come to our school. They know what they're going to see. And I think that's the difference. It's also having to kind of, as a school, put yourself out there so that people can come in as visitors and as, you know, observers to see, okay, the community in operation.
It's brilliant. I mean, it feels to me like it's one of those things which is like you get into a positive spiral. So when you've got diversity in the staff body, you can celebrate that. It's more evident, and you gather momentum around that. I've spoken to a lot of people about this. It's sort of, you know, when you're just only fishing from the same old pool, you can't change that. So this is one of the hardest things to do for in some contexts, is to reach out beyond that, sort of to go looking for people, to attract people to consciously, rather than just doing the same old adverts and seeing who you get. You're just going to get the same people. You've got to do something bigger than that somehow. That's probably that's for another conversation. Just tell us a little bit. I know that, you know, you've got Crux Leadership Development. I've seen your website there. That sounds really interesting. I like the fact that it says essential building blocks with hexagons on it, because in my work with walkthroughs, it's all about building and hexagons. So like, yes, get in more of that. But what are you doing with that? What's your work around that?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the hexagons was my graphic designer's idea. And when she said what the vision was, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I've run with it, you know, she's good. But it's kind of bringing together everything that I do. So, you know, I had Amanda Wilson coaching, and the coaching was an element of it. But over the last few years, I've done a lot of training. I've done events. And so it's kind of bringing all that together under one umbrella. So I do work with Teach First on their MPQ conference, and I deliver 2 workshops for them, and I have done for the past 3 years. I've done the first 100 Days Head Teachers Conference, and this will be the 3rd year that's run. And then also I do some writing, I do some article tears and other publications. So it's kind of just bringing it all together, but all with a steer towards supporting teachers and leaders on their journey, because for me that's kind of at the heart of everything I do. I've always loved supporting people. I've always liked kind of being a cheerleader. Somebody tells me they're going to do something, it's like, right, okay, how are we going to do it? What are you going to do? Holding them to account. It can get really annoying sometimes, but that's just the way it is. You know, if you're going to tell me you're going to do something, you need to expect that I'm going to come back with a, you know. And my husband said to me, we went away this weekend, and his aunt, he said, oh, you know, when we were driving back, he said, oh, I really like what he said. He said, you know, his aunt had said something she was going to do, and then you said to her, and when are you going to do it? And it just comes naturally to me. You know, I wasn't intentionally trying to coach her, but I think it's, for me, I love seeing other people succeed. I love seeing other people reach where they need to get to. And so for Crux Leadership, it is that, right, what's at the heart of you, what you want to do, and what do you need to get there? And sometimes it's not just about one thing. It's not just about coaching, it's about events, it's about networking, it's about all the different things that can combine to get an individual to where they need to be. And I found over the past, you know, 10, 15 years or so that I've kind of been really pushing this, that it is about the connections that you make and the conversations that you have, and the rooms that you get in that can make a difference. And I think for me, it's being able to create more opportunities for people to be in more rooms together.
I love it.
What's next for you then, Amanda? What's the next thing, big project on the horizon? Oh, you sound like you've got an enormous amount on at the minute, but it's...
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should ask. So I've just finished my master's. I did a master's in coaching and mentoring practice. My dissertation was on the experience of coaching for Black head teachers. I've been accepted to do my PhD, so I'm starting that in September. And that's going to be a focus on code switching and whether Black teachers feel the need to code switch in order to climb the career ladder. And then we've got another head teachers conference, first 100 Days Head Teachers Conference. And then a new thing that I'm doing in August is this big extravaganza gala, Met Gala meets Grime Gala meets education, where we're just going to have a jolly old time just before we go back in the new academic year. So I kind of, a few things on the go. And plus I'm doing a psychotherapy course.
Wow. When do you blink and breathe, Amanda?
I love it. I mean, it's It's fantastic. We're getting the time up, the notice from our producer now. But honestly, Amanda, it was brilliant talking to you. I'm so in awe of that, to be honest. You're a head teacher, and you're going to do a PhD, and that's just, I think that's brilliant. So you're going to be in a few years' time, be Dr. Wilson.
Wilson, yeah.
Doff our caps to you appropriately.
I appreciate that.
But honestly, it's so inspiring, and I love this. In fact, it's one of the other themes I was going to mention earlier, but I feel like that we talked about confidence and then authenticity, but I felt there's another common theme in the book and the letters is this thing of networking, bringing people up, helping others, and I feel like you embody that through the way you talk about people, but also just the fact that you invited people to be part of that book and lifting people up in that way. So honestly, thank you so much for joining us on Mind the Gap. It's a real honor to speak to you, and look forward to following your progress and keep in touch with us. It's really been great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks everyone listening to Mind the Gap. What a great episode that's been. Look forward to further episodes on the podcast. We've had a great run with more guests to come. So thanks you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We hear from people all over the world actually dialing into Mind the Gap. It blows my mind really how far our podcast has reached. So thank you for listening, and thanks again to Amanda, and we'll see you really soon.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.